October 1887. Three silver miners working a lateral shaft in the Tintic mining district of Juab County, Utah, broke through an unstable section of wall 12 feet from the main bore and found a chamber that no crew had excavated. The foreman, a Cornishman named Thomas Bray, who had spent 19 years working underground in England and the American West, dropped his pick and stood without moving for what he later told his shift supervisor was a very long time. The chamber was 6 feet wide and 8 feet deep. The ceiling was intact. The air inside was dry and still in the particular way of a space that has been sealed for longer than anyone present could estimate, and stretched across the far wall, on a shelf of flat stone that had not been cut by any tool Bray recognized, not by drill, not by chisel, not by any instrument in use in American mining in 1887, was a body. She was on her back. Her arms were at her sides, arranged with a deliberateness that no collapse or settling of earth could account for. And she was, by every measurement Thomas Bray was capable of making with his caliper gauge and the 22-inch rule he carried on every shift, somewhere between 7 feet and 7 feet 2 inches from heel to crown. She was not a skeleton. She was not ancient. Her hair was dark and intact, and the clothing around her a wrapped garment of a woven material none of the three miners could identify, with a weight and texture unlike wool or cotton or any commercial fabric, had not decomposed in any way that suggested great age. The camp physician, a doctor named Aldous Crane, who had trained at the Ohio Medical College before coming west in 1881, estimated her age at death as between 14 and 17 years. He recorded that estimate in his field journal on October 14, 1887. He recorded nothing else. The official record of the Tintic Mining District for October 1887, preserved in the Juab County Clerk's Archive in Nephi, Utah, contains no entry for the chamber discovery. It contains no entry for the body. It contains no mention of Thomas Bray filing any incident report, which under territorial mining law of that period he was required to do within 48 hours of any structural deviation from an approved bore path. The deviation was not filed. The chamber was not recorded. And the body of a young woman who stood 7 feet tall, who had been laid with deliberate care on a dressed stone shelf inside a natural rock formation in the mountains of central Utah, was removed from the mine in a canvas freight wagon sometime in the week following the discovery and never appeared in any document, coroner's record, territorial census entry, or church burial record for any county in the Utah Territory again. No one recorded her name, because in the official record she was never there at all. Before we go any further, if forgotten stories and buried records are the kind of history that pulls you back, hit subscribe so the next investigation finds you when it drops. The algorithm tends to suppress this kind of research unless you personally tell it otherwise. To understand what Thomas Bray found in that lateral chamber and why the institution responsible for recording it chose silence instead, we have to go back to a version of Utah territorial history that the Standard account has quietly compressed into a single paragraph about silver and copper extraction. The Tintic Mining District opened in earnest in 1869, following the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. By 1887, it was one of the most productive silver and lead mining regions in the American West, generating annual output that the territorial government valued at more than $4 million. The district was governed not by the territory alone, but by a layered system of federal oversight administered through the Bureau of Mines, the General Land Office, and, from 1882 onward, a federal inspector's office established specifically to monitor the Tintic operations after a series of shaft collapses that the territorial government had failed to prevent. This matters for one specific reason. Any structural discovery in a Tintic mine in 1887, any chamber, void, or deviation from an approved bore plan, was required by federal regulation to be reported to the district's federal inspector within 48 hours. The federal inspector in October 1887 was a man named Clarence Whitmore, appointed by the Department of the Interior. Whitmore's field inspection log for October 1887 is held at the National Archives in Denver, Colorado. The log covers every mine in the district. It covers bore deviations, shaft collapses, equipment failures, and personnel changes at operations all across Juab County. It contains no entry for Thomas Bray's lateral shaft. It contains no entry for a chamber discovery. And it contains no entry for the week between October 14th, when Dr. Aldous Crane recorded his age estimate in his field journal, and October 21st, when the next documented activity at Bray's mine appears in the district record. 7 days. No record. On a federally regulated mining operation, where a federal inspector was legally required to document every structural deviation from an approved bore path. What set Thomas Bray apart from every other foreman in the Tintic district was not his discovery. Other men had found unusual chambers in that mountain range before him. The geology of the Tintic Range is honeycombed with natural voids, some of enormous size. What set Bray apart was what he did in the hours after the discovery. He did not file an incident report. He did not summon the federal inspector. He went to the camp physician. That choice, bypassing the legal reporting chain entirely, going directly to the one man at the camp whose primary obligation was to the body in front of him rather than to a mining company or a federal bureaucracy, is the reason we know anything about this at all. Dr. Aldous Crane wrote it down, and even Crane, in the end, wrote only one sentence before going silent for 8 days. Dr. Aldous Crane was not a man given to exaggeration. He had trained at the Ohio Medical College in Columbus, graduating in the class of 1877, and had spent 4 years in practice in Cleveland before moving west. He had worked as camp physician for 3 different mining operations in the Tintic district before 1887, and his field journals for those years, 6 cloth-bound volumes in total, covering 1883 through 1890, are held in the special collections of the Brigham Young University Harold B. Lee Library in Provo, Utah. They were donated by his granddaughter in 1961. The entry for October 14, 1887, is one of the most abbreviated entries in 6 years of otherwise detailed daily medical records. It reads, in its entirety, examined remains of female, approximately 14-17 years, unusual stature, cause of death not determinable, removed by company order. The next entry is dated October 22nd. There are no entries for 8 days. In 6 years of field journals, Crane had never skipped more than 2 consecutive days, and those gaps had always been annotated with a note about travel or illness. The 8-day gap in October 1887 is annotated with nothing. There is a growing body of independent research suggesting that the official history of skeletal and human remains discoveries in the American West during the territorial period, particularly the decades between 1865 and 1910, is incomplete in ways that mainstream physical anthropologists have consistently declined to engage with. Newspaper accounts from regional papers of that era document discoveries of human remains of unusual stature in Utah, Nevada, and Colorado mining operations, with a frequency that the academic record does not reflect. Territorial coroner records for the same period contain systematic gaps that correspond, in several documented cases, to the same weeks in which newspaper accounts placed unusual discoveries in the same counties. The pattern is not random. It is consistent across geography and across decade. A discovery is reported locally, An official account is filed that minimizes or omits the finding, and the physical evidence enters a federal collection process from which it does not publicly emerge. The Smithsonian Institution's Bureau of American Ethnology, which had standing authority during this period to claim and transport human remains of anthropological interest from anywhere in the United States territories, conducted 37 field collection operations in the Intermountain West between 1880 and 1900. The inventory of those collections, as published in the Bureau's annual reports, accounts for 29 of those operations in detail. 8 operations are listed by date and location only, with no inventory of what was collected and no names of the field agents who conducted them. One of those 8 undocumented collection operations is dated October 1887. Its listed location is Joab County, Utah Territory. That is where this investigation begins to close. A mining assayer named Bernard Holloway, who worked the Tintic District from 1885 to 1893, kept a personal journal that passed through his family for 3 generations before being sold at a Utah estate auction in 2004. The buyer was a private collector in Salt Lake City. A researcher named Patricia Engel examined the journal in 2009 with the collector's permission and transcribed several entries. Holloway's entry for October 19, 1887, 5 days after Dr. Crane's truncated field note, describes the arrival at the Tintic District office of 2 men he had not seen before. He describes them as carrying federal identification and speaking with Eastern accents. He describes one of them as presenting a Bureau of Ethnology credential to the district superintendent, a man named Josiah Holt, and Holt stepping back from his own desk to let the man sit down. Holloway wrote that the 2 men were at the district office for 6 hours. He wrote that when they left, they took with them 2 leather document cases and a freight wagon that had been loaded behind the district office building before they arrived, as if its contents had been prepared in advance of the men's arrival. But here is what makes Bernard Holloway's October 1887 account different from every other peripheral witness account of this story. He named the wagon driver. He wrote the name in his journal because the driver was a man he recognized, a camp freighter named Dutch Alderman, who worked regular hauls between the Tintic District and the rail depot at Eureka. Holloway wrote that Dutch Alderman told him 2 days later that the load he had hauled from behind the district office to the Eureka depot had been transferred there to a private rail car that was not on any scheduled freight manifest he had seen before or since. Dutch Alderman did not know what was in the freight wagon. He knew only that it had been loaded before he arrived to collect it, that the 2 men in federal credentials had ridden beside him on the box seat for the full 12 miles to the Eureka depot, and that neither of them spoke to him once on the journey except to tell him, when the depot came into view, that his payment would be sent to the Tintic District office and not given to him directly. Holloway wrote that Alderman found that arrangement unusual enough to mention it twice. Dutch Alderman's name appears in the Tintic District Freight Ledger for 1887, which is held in the Joab County Historical Society archive in Nephi, Utah. The ledger entry for his haul on October 19, 1887, lists the cargo as federal survey materials. The destination is listed as Washington, D.C. The weight entered in the load column is 411 pounds. A canvas-wrapped body, carefully preserved, laid on a stone shelf, removed by company order. 411 pounds listed as federal survey materials. A Bureau of Ethnology credential presented to a district superintendent who stepped back from his own desk, and an 8-day gap in a physician's journal that had never before gone silent for more than 2 consecutive days. The Smithsonian Institution has never adequately addressed the undocumented October 1887 collection operation listed in the Bureau of American Ethnology's records as occurring in Juab County, Utah Territory. It is never explained why that operation, alone among the 8 undocumented operations in a 20-year period, produced no public inventory, no field report, and no named agents in any accessible archive. It is never explained why the Bureau of Mines District Inspection Log for October 1887 in the Tintic District contains no record of the chamber discovery that Dr. Aldous Crane documented in his private field journal on October 14th of that year. It is never explained what federal survey materials weighing 411 pounds were transferred by private rail car from the Eureka Depot to Washington in the same week that Dr. Crane wrote the words "removed by company order" and then went silent for 8 days. Why did Clarence Whitmore, the federally appointed Tintic District Inspector, not record a structural deviation that federal regulation required him to document within 48 hours of its occurrence? Why did Thomas Bray, a foreman with 19 years of professional obligation and a legal duty to file incident reports, file nothing, not because the records were lost, but because no record exists of a report ever being submitted? Why would the Bureau of American Ethnology conduct a field collection operation in Juab County in October 1887 and produce no inventory of what was collected, when every one of its 29 other documented operations in the same period produced a detailed published inventory? And why is the freight ledger entry for Dutch Alderman's Hall on October 19, 1887, the only ledger entry in the entire 1887 Tintic District freight record that lists Washington, D.C. as a destination? The honest answer is that we cannot know with certainty what was in that wagon. What we have is a physician's entry that was abbreviated to a single sentence and followed by 8 days of silence. A freight ledger that records 411 pounds of federal survey materials shipped to Washington by private rail car the same week. A Bureau of Ethnology operation with no inventory, and a foreman's non-report on a discovery he spent a very long time standing in front of before he said a single word. That is not coincidence. That is a pattern. And once you understand what that pattern looked like across the American West in the territorial period, you begin to understand why so many discoveries were absorbed into federal collections that have never been fully open to independent review. Bernard Holloway's journal, the only civilian document that names a specific person moving a specific load on a specific day in October 1887, is in private hands in Salt Lake City. Patricia Engel's transcriptions of the relevant entries are held in her personal research files. She has not published them, though she described the Holloway Journal's contents in a 2011 presentation to the Utah State Historical Society that is listed in that organization's program archive but was never formally published in its proceedings. The freight ledger that records Dutch Alderman's Hall is in the Juab County Historical Society archive in Nephi, Utah. It is accessible to researchers by appointment. The weight entry, 411 pounds, is still there, still listed as federal survey materials, still addressed to Washington, D.C., on a page that no published history of the Tintic Mining District has ever cited. Dr. Crane's field journals are in the Harold B. Lee Library at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. The October 14th entry is still there, 1 sentence, 9 words after the medical notation. So is the 8-day gap that follows it, unbroken and unannotated, in a journal that never went silent for more than 2 consecutive days in 6 years of otherwise meticulous daily records. These are not theories, these are documents, and they are in repositories that you can visit. The official history of the Tintic Mining District tells us it was a silver and lead operation whose records are substantially complete. What the documents tell us is that in 1 week, in October 1887, something was found examined by a licensed physician, removed under federal authority, shipped to Washington by private rail car, and erased from every official record as thoroughly as if the lateral chamber had never been broken through at all. A young woman, 7 feet tall, laid on dressed stone in the mountains of central Utah, was moved through the official record in a single physician's sentence, and then became, in the language of every public document that followed, nothing. She was never given a name, because the people who took her never intended for anyone to ask. These records survive because someone kept a journal, and someone kept a ledger, and someone wrote down the name of the wagon driver, a detail so small and so specific that it would mean nothing to anyone who did not already know what had been loaded in that wagon the morning before Dutch aldermen arrived to collect it. Subscribe and share this with someone who still believes the Smithsonian's published inventories are complete. History does not disappear when the wagon rolls away. It disappears when no one writes down what was in it. Next week, I am examining a Bureau of American Ethnology field report from 1893, one of the 29 that does have a published inventory. That lists a collection from a Nevada site described only as site of unusual skeletal dimensions. The field agent named in that report resigned from the Bureau 6 weeks after it was filed. His letter of resignation, held in the Smithsonian Institution archives, contains a single sentence that has never been reproduced in any published account. You will not want to miss it.